First Edition is a ministry of First Community Church, a place of worship for everyone, regardless of religious background. Join us to enhance your spiritual journey and share in God's love and grace. And now, First Edition.
What does it mean to be you? Strip away all the masks that we wear. And I'm not talking about the masks that we've been wearing to protect ourselves from this virus, but the invisible masks, what Susan Howitch calls the glittering images, the ways we want people to see us and understand us. Strip all that away, the false self. Who are you at the center of your soul? Who are you really? Who has God created you to be? What are you called to do in this life? Whether you're 18 or 98 or somewhere in between, who are you? This is a question that comes to us throughout our lives. maybe the first time it really comes into being is when we're reaching adolescence. You know, that time around 11 or 12 when our bodies and indeed even our minds are going through radical changes and differences. Our personalities take on different feelings as well. Maybe an 11-year-old doesn't say to himself or herself, "Who am I?" But it's almost a subconscious thing of wondering who they are. I remember driving my son Stephen to school on the last day of 5th grade. Now, we had something that I did with my boys. I would speak in these goofy voices, but talk about normal things. And when they were little, it would make them just laugh. There was a laugh right there. Thank you very much. It would just make them laugh like crazy. On this day, I'm driving Stephen to school. It's the last day of 5th grade, and I'm talking in this goofy voice, and he's laughing, and he's rolling around on the front seat, and he's just having a great time. He gets out of the car to go to school. He leans back in, and he says, "Dad, you're the funniest dad ever." Well, I kind of walked around on cloud 9 all day. Boy, this was a great day. This was a good day. Fast forward to 3 months later. First day of 6th grade. I'm driving him to middle school. His first day in middle school. I'm doing my goofy voice thing, and he's just staring out the window. And I don't really notice that he's not laughing. And I'm just still doing the same normal thing. We get to the school, get to the drop-off point. He opens the door. He starts to walk away, and he leans back, and he says, "Dad, you're weird." We shift and change. I noticed in my youth ministry, I was in San Diego for 5 years with kids there. The 7th graders were not quite the same as they were by the time they got to 12th grade. Most of these changes were good, positive ones, but sometimes they became difficult as we try to find out the answer to who am I? Who are you? Literally 10 years ago, I was sitting at my desk at the church I served previously, 53 years old, and it just dawned on me in my morning quiet time, I'm not the young, hip, radical preacher that I always tried to be. My hips are radically in pain these days, and it's time for me to reevaluate, and I mean this part seriously, to really ask, who am I? What is God calling me to do at this moment in my life? What does my relationship with my wife and my family look like now at this stage? It's these same kind of questions that Jesus is wrestling with on this day in the desert. 40 days of fasting. He's there to literally ask, what does it mean to be Jesus? The great theologian Frederick Buechner is the one who penned that question. What does it mean to be Jesus? Jesus is literally wrestling with himself and eventually with the devil with that question, what does it mean to be me? And think about this. Jesus is on the front end of his ministry. He's had this amazing, spiritually high moment where he's baptized in the River Jordan, and he comes out of the waters and he hears a voice, "You are my child. You are my beloved." And then the Spirit takes him, almost in the same moment, off of that high spiritual experience, literally out into the depth of the desert, to the wilderness, to struggle with the question, who am I? I mean, think about this. Jesus is at the beginning of his ministry. He really hasn't even begun his ministry yet. The teaching, preaching, healing, and feeding that he will do for the next 3 years, he hasn't done. Now, I don't know if 2,000 years ago, ministers made strategic plans or came up with what their opportunities were for ministry and made a list and all that. So I don't know what he's doing exactly, but he doesn't know. Listen to this. He doesn't know what he doesn't know. He hasn't experienced any of it yet. He can't say for sure exactly what's going to happen. And so he's struggling with this question, who am I? What will I do next? I remember many years ago when the church I was serving hired a young woman, a young, brilliant woman, 20 years old, from TCU, to be our college summer intern. She's now the director of a large museum in the Midwest and is doing quite well. I love that when we did a check-in. She'd been there about a month. Came into my office and said, well, tell me how it's going. What are you experiencing? And she kind of, in a quiet, hushed voice, kind of looked around a little bit to see if anybody was listening. And she said, this is really hard work. Who knew? I said, don't tell anyone, please. Just don't keep that quiet and to yourself. She didn't know what she didn't know until she got immersed into it, until she found herself engaged in ministry with real people, with real issues and real concerns. Jesus doesn't know what he doesn't know. And in fact, you heard the phrase at the end of the reading a moment ago, the devil waits for opportune times. This is the perfect time. Jesus is famished, tired, exhausted, I believe frightened, worried. If it bothers you to think of Jesus being frightened, skip ahead sometime and read the story of his experience in the Garden of Gethsemane where he says, Lord, please take me another way. Please get me out of this. Sweating drops of blood. He knows what it means to be frightened. And that's when the devil comes to him. Now let me say a word about the devil real quick here so that we understand what this is happening. The word devil is a transliteration of the Greek word for devil, diabolos, which is a translation of the Hebrew word Satan. You hear the root of our word Satan? The Hasatan. Hasatan is literally in Hebrew the accuser. He functions very much like one who accuses people of things, sort of like a prosecuting attorney. And if you've got a joke about the lawyer being like the devil, you can insert that one there and tell it to yourself. But that's what he's doing. He's coming to Jesus and he's basically saying, so, Jesus, and by the way, I believe that what Jesus is having here is a dream or a vision, maybe even an ecstatic experience. So don't get caught up in the literalness of it. So here the accusing, prosecuting attorney, the devil, comes to him. So, Jesus, you had a great spiritual experience. Wonderful. What happened? You heard a voice. Oh, what did the voice say? You're the beloved? You're the child of God? Amazing. Prove it. Prove it. And then the temptations come. And notice the temptations. The temptations are wrapped in common sense. Turn stones to bread. Are there hungry people in the world 2,000 years ago? Are there hungry people today? It makes sense, doesn't it? Oh, you know what? People need a sign. They'd love to know that you're real, that God is real. Why don't we put you up at the top of the temple? Jump down. Let your angels come and catch you. It would make great sense to give encouragement to people. Wouldn't it, Jesus? Do that. Oh, and our politics, our worldwide politics are a mess. They are today, too. Wouldn't it make sense, the devil is saying? Wouldn't it make sense if you could organize and radicalize and bring all these politicians together, bring a strong government? Wouldn't that be a great thing? Why not do that? You see how the temptations make sense? They make serious sense. But what's the real temptation? The temptation is for Jesus to become something he's not, to become someone he's not, to reach out and take hold of power and control. I believe that these kinds of temptations come at us the strongest when we're feeling afraid, when we're feeling as though we don't know what's going to happen next, as though the future is fuzzy and blurry and not quite sure. And so when we encounter those kinds of feelings, the temptation is really strong to take hold of it, to grab onto it, and somewhere find power and control, thinking that's what we need. Notice that Jesus does all these things. He will feed the hungry in a miraculous way. He will perform other miracles that will provide faith for the people that he encounters, healing and even bringing someone back from the dead. He will do those things in a miraculous kind of way. And he, in some ways too, will challenge the politics of his day as he does the politics of our day. The kingdom of God, he says to them, is an upside down kind of kingdom where the last will be first, where the meek will inherit the earth. He will do those things. But it's in those tense moments of uncertainty and fear when we, like Jesus, are tempted. Don't raise your hand, but have you been tempted ever? I'm sure you have. I'm sure everyone in this room not only has been tempted, but maybe even has given in to that temptation. If you've been tempted, good. You're in good company. You sit next to Jesus, who was tempted in every way that we are, in the same way that we are, in a variety of ways, in all the possible ways. My favorite class in seminary was called Christian Social Ethics. It was taught by one of my favorite professors, Fred Norris. Dr. Norris is in the resurrection now, but he was an amazing professor, PhD from Yale, brilliant, knew stuff off the top of his head that no normal person could know. He was, and not only that, he was funny and engaging and was a great preacher, and he just had all these skills. You'd hear him coming down the hallway to class from 4, 5, 6 doors away, because he would just be laughing and saying hi to everybody. He was just gregarious and wonderful. Christian social ethics, in this class we dealt with things like poverty, race, war, and other things. On the day I'm remembering now, he was dealing with power and control and how a person of Christian faith approaches these ideas, these issues. He stopped in the middle of his lecture and he said, "Let me tell you a story. It's about my grandfather, who was one of the most brilliant traveling evangelists around the South. I went to school in Tennessee, around the South that you've ever seen. He was known everywhere as a mesmerizing preacher. He could raise a congregation up and then send them out in the world in an unbelievable way, enthusiastic, excited and ready to serve in the name of Jesus. He could just inspire congregations and churches. They'd bring him into all these different congregations all around. But then he stopped. He no longer was an evangelist." Fred said, "That happened when I was 9 years old. And I went to my dad and I said, 'Daddy, why is Grandpa not preaching anymore? He's such a great preacher. And he loves me so much. He's so kind and sweet to me. How come he can't work in the church anymore?' His dad said, 'Freddie, one too many times he got caught taking the offering and putting it in his pocket. One too many times he was caught in an affair with a woman that he wasn't married to. And finally the church said, this abusive behavior must stop. Until there's healing and emotional reality and renewal, you can no longer serve.' Freddie was heartbroken. He said, 'But Daddy, what happened? How come he did these things?' And Fred's dad said, 'Freddie, he forgot. He forgot. He forgot that Norrises don't behave like this. He forgot that followers of Jesus don't behave like this. Son, he forgot.'" Do you remember the line that's been made famous recently in the Spider-Man movies? "With great power comes great responsibility." No, Spider-Man's not the first one to say that. That saying's been around for thousands of years. With great power comes great responsibility. Ministers and others are just as guilty of giving into the temptation of power as anyone else. With great power comes great responsibility. Vladimir Putin has forgotten this. He too has forgotten. I pray every day, and I have been praying since that evil invasion began, that he would remember that the path thereon leads to destruction. I continue to pray that he will remember this path leads to nowhere. For you and me, back to this moment, do you find yourself in moments of uncertainty and fear tempted maybe to lash out, to reach out, to take hold, to take power, to do whatever is necessary? Do you find yourself in that way? This has been a problem not only for us individually, but also for Christians congregationally. It's been around for a long time. Philip Yancey, who's a great writer, he writes from an evangelical Christian perspective. I don't always agree with him, but he's got a brilliant mind, and he puts challenges in front of me that I need to consider. He talks about the fact that the church for 2,000 years, and maybe especially so in the last 100 years, has too often given in, not to the way of Jesus, but to power and control. Too often, these Christians have forgotten the Christ who is at the beginning of their name. Too often the church gets caught up in this. Too often the church gets caught up in the ways of the world, and we forget that the way of Christ, the way of God, the way of truth, love, hope, grace, joy is the only way we are called to walk. I'll confess too, I know what this is like. I've done the same stupid thing. Several years ago, a couple of years before I was asked to apply for this position and invited to consider being the senior minister here, I was invited to another pastoral position, not in a local congregation though, but with an organization. I would still be functioning as a pastor, but in a much different way. And part of that role was going to be access to the White House. And I was kind of excited about this idea. I had a few friends who said, yeah, you should do this. And they turned my name in. I got recommendations from a variety of my friends that I really respect. And a lot of people pushing me saying, yeah, do this, do this. And so I put together a packet and I sent in my name. And they said, yes, we want you to apply. And so I put together this packet and sent it off to them. And about 4 days before the call might come for a conversation to begin discussing, are you right for this position? I was on vacation with Julie, my wife. 6 a.m. on vacation, I woke up. I looked at her and I said, I don't want this job. What am I thinking? She looked at me and she said, thank God you figured that out. Now go back to bed. See, the job itself wasn't bad. The job itself wasn't wrong. It made, in some ways, common sense. Some of the skills I have would have been good for that position. Do you see? Those things make sense. The problem was I was tempted to apply for the job because of the power that I perceived that might come with it. The problem that Jesus faces with the devil in the desert is changing who he is, of giving over his way of life to power and control. What Jesus finally discovers is that he's not Superman. He's not supposed to leap off of tall buildings. He's not supposed to be faster than a speeding train or a speeding bullet. None of that stuff. What does he discover? That he is to become as vulnerable as he can and extend his arms to a hurting world, to finally, in the most vulnerable act there is, hand himself over in suffering and in death to the world. And in that act of vulnerability, not power and control, he realizes truly he is not Superman. He is called as the Messiah. So here's the rub, though. None of us are Jesus. I'm not. I'm very sure I'm not. If you're not too sure, ask someone who loves you. They'll clarify things for you. We're not Jesus. We're going to stumble and fall. As I said earlier, I'm pretty sure, don't raise your hand, but I'm pretty sure everyone in the room has stumbled and fallen at least once, given in to temptation. Now, I'm not talking about taking an extra cookie. I'm talking about giving in to something serious and found yourself stumbling and falling and asking, how did this happen? But that's why Jesus in his ministry so often preaches love, grace, and forgiveness. Do you remember the story of the prodigal son? He wants his inheritance before his dad's dead. He's basically saying, Dad, I wish you were dead. Dad says, fine, take the money. Remember the story? He goes to South Israel where there's this town called Las Vegas. He blows all the money there. He loses all of it in 3 or 4 months. He ends up sleeping with the pigs. He wakes up with the pigs and says, I could be a slave at my dad's house and do better than this. So he goes home. Remember the story? The dad sprints down the road when he sees his son. The son can't even say he's sorry before the dad just grabs him and holds him and tells you, my son, you were dead, you're alive again. Jesus tells that story so that you and I can hear the good news of this, that when we stumble and fall, we're still invited, we're still welcomed home. It's David Brooks, the brilliant columnist who wrote the book, The Road to Character. He said every one of us in his book, every one of us stumbles. We're all stumblers. The stumblers, though, become whole in the struggle. We become whole, we stumblers, in the struggle. And in that struggle, let us become who we are. Amen.
Sing of thy glory.